Welcome to this policy roundtable. Something that I particularly care for, I must admit. And I wanted to have this roundtable with some friends for a special occasion. 20 years ago, David Pearce passed away. And I wanted to have a moment to commemorate him and reflect about his legacy. Since this conference often hosts many young scholars, let me say a few words about David Pearce, because most of you never come across, and especially the young scholars probably don't know who David was and just had heard this name. And in the past days I was Googling. Into Google, you don't find much about David Pearce. It was another era. So now there are videos and impact factors, and all that did not exist at that time. So very briefly, David studied in Oxford and at LSE. He got his academic positions in several British universities before moving to UCL. He moved to UCL in 1983. And reading The Guardian, I found out that at some point, the Department of Economics at UCL had some negative comments, and they were wondering whether to close it. David became head of department in 1984. And he was a director from 84 to 88. And immediately the department visibility and reputation increased, and it kept increasing very much, especially since 1990, when he had the idea of launching a master in environmental economics, which soon became a reference point in the whole academia. And that's actually where we came across with many of you. I was in the master in economics, but I was already eager to know more about environmental economics. So I asked repeatedly, I'm a stubborn guy, to attend the classes of David Pearce. At the beginning they said, no way. This is another master program. But in the end they say, okay, go and listen to David Pearce. And that's where we actually met. I don't go into the many successes that David had in academic terms. I just want to recall a key book in 1989, The Blueprint for a Green Economy, which was actually the reason why I went to UCL. Because as I was a student, I was preparing my undergraduate thesis, I came across this book. And I found it so brilliant, so insightful, so motivating that I said, I want to go and study there. But I wanted to be an economist, not an environmental economist. So apparently I ended up being an environmental economist. And I said, okay, I will stay in the master in economics. Still, I met him, and I was, like, how do you say, on the way to Damascus, no? Okay, so wow, this guy is great. And apparently I'm not the only one who thought that, because many years afterwards I see many people who still have that feeling. And that's why you are here today, because I wanted to have a reunion of some of his pupils, some of his students, in the years where I was there, or in the neighboring years. The list of former students who are now professor, managers, directors, blah, 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 is very long. But at least those that I came across in those years, I wanted to reunite you here. So, very briefly, I introduce my panelist, Ben Groom. Ben, not again. So Ben, you know Ben, no need to say who's he. Astrid. Astrid Agostini is a senior officer in the FAO's Sustainable Agricultural Program and natural resource economist. She previously led the FAO's climate finance team, guiding engagement with the Green Climate Fund. She has worked extensively on climate-smart agriculture, investment capacity development, and sustainable bioenergy. And she has an MA from Oxford, and guess, a Master in Environmental Economics from UCL. Then I have Xavier. Xavier is Professor of Economics at the University of Vigo, Director of the Research Center Economics for Energy. He was the former Director of FSR Climate before me. His work focuses on climate, energy, and public economics with extensive publications on environmental taxation and energy demand. And he has also contributed to the IPCC 5th and 6th assessment report. And last but not least, Massimiliano. Massimiliano Mazzanti is Professor of Economics at the University of Ferrara. He's the Department Director, Delegate for National Recovery and Resilience Plan. He directs SEEDS, an inter-university research center that is now composed of 12 from...
Soon 13.
Okay, yes, because there are some new entries, 13 universities very, very soon, and also directs the University of Ferrara Church's Center on Circular Economy Innovation for Small, Medium Enterprises. And he has published extensively on policy evaluation, cost-benefit analysis, innovation economics, labor economics, culture economics. So the reason why we are here is clear. Less clear maybe the kind of questions that I can ask you. But just to direct this conversation, I thought of two questions for all of you. One is, what has been David's impact on your professional but also personal life? And the second is, what, in your view, is his main legacy in scientific and policy terms? I will probably start with you, Ben, and then move in this direction. Is that okay? Okay.
All right, you can hear me, right? Yeah, great. All right, back in 2015, it was only 10 years since David had died, and I was asked to give a presentation then as well to think about some of these questions. I'm going to talk about how David has sort of more or less influenced my career. I did my master's in environmental economics with him. He was my PhD supervisor as well. A lot of influence there. So I wanted to talk about his effect on social discounting. That's what I did my PhD on, and I've worked a lot in that area as well, and I'm going to tell you a few things. So this was the, there's David. This is the original slide, right? Now, where it starts is with a paper by Pearce and Ulf in 1995, where they basically calibrated the Ramsey rule for the Treasury to insert into the Green Book on cost-benefit guidelines. At that time, also, the government was thinking about social cost of carbon and how we're going to do that. And then any kind of positive discount rate means the social cost of carbon is going to be super, super low. And that was a concern to David. He was into this. He was very much an economist, but his chief love, I think, was philosophy, and intergenerational fairness was one of the main parts of this whole story, as it would be if you're into resource economics. And so this paper led to a big change in the Green Book, from 6% to 3.5%, introduction to the Ramsey rule in social cost, in the cost-benefit guidelines and so on. And then it panned out like this. So there was a bunch of work on declining discount rates with Weitzman and Gollier and Billy Pizer there. That David invited them over to UCL to talk and stuff like that. And then we wrote this paper. We worked with the Treasury there, wrote this paper on declining discount rates. And then literally 3 months later, this was introduced into the Treasury Green Book as well. So it happened really, really quickly, this policy change, right? There it is, declining term structure of discount rates, puts more weight on future generations, bunch of different papers. There's a gamma discounting era. Then it happened in France. Then the Stern review comes along. The Stern has to handle declining discount rates and the Ramsey rule, and all the discussion with Nordhaus was around that. Bunch of papers by Weitzman, Nordhaus, etc., etc. Gollier, I call it the dismal era because of the dismal theorem of Weitzman, etc. And then there was this kind of workshops in the US where they started talking about the Ramsey rule and how they were going to value the social cost of carbon in their policy. And we were invited to that, and it was, Ken Arrow was there, for God's sake. And this was like, these are the kind of questions that were being asked, and the research that I was kind of involved with, basically because of David Pearce's guidance on this being an interesting issue in policy, So as it went on, Norway did the same things, more reports here and there. Another report by Maureen Cropper should be mentioned here. She's the one who organized it, another huge influence. And so it went on. All the policies changed in the Netherlands and so on, just because of this interest of us in this topic, right? Okay, so that's up to 2015. I don't know why Cyprus and Ukraine are there. This is the old presentation from 10 years ago. I don't know what was going on at that point, but clearly something. All right, so then what happened from 2015 onwards? I wanted to kind of continue this. There was a whole bunch more work on declining discount rates. So this is like the contra gamma. This is where Weitzman renounced the gamma discounting paper because of all of the research from people like Christian Gollier, and also Gollier's papers said that the discount rate could actually increase with the time horizon if you take into account risk, by the way. So the whole thing was developing. Then you have what I'm going to call the interruption after the US had reduced the discount rate to 3% and 2.5% for long term. Something happened in 2016. In fact, two things happened. It's not Brexit, it's the other one. And they reverted back to 7%. So the social cost of carbon went from like $50 per ton because of the discount rate going up to 7% to $1 per ton of carbon dioxide. Okay. After that, people started thinking about inequality, not intergenerational, intragenerational. And there's Johannes Emmerling, who was here yesterday. That's Ulrike Korneck. They were the kind of people who are working on this issue right now, thinking about how the social cost of carbon through the discount rate is affected by inequality today, right? Not just over time. So there's a whole bunch of stuff there. This culminated with a review, the Green Book review by myself and Michael Spatman and Mark Freeman, who's in the picture there. And our paper in the AEJ, which was basically a survey of the Ramsey rule and all of the experts, including Arrow and Weitzman and all of these people who responded to our survey. And we have all this information on the Ramsey rule now, which fed into that Green Book review. Then you've got another declining discount rate era, more work by Billy Pizer. There's a Hansel L paper on the social cost of carbon again. And then you have the Biden getting back in here, right, which is the reversal of the interruption. And they revert back to the Obama guidelines, which is what was there before, back to 3%, 2.5% for long run, 2.5% because of the declining discount rate literature that David was so interested in. Then it goes on here. Here I'm calling this the Dasgupta era because it's the Dasgupta review, biodiversity economics, and thinking about environmental discount rates and relative prices, and how scarcity means that you need to be thinking more about prices in the future for ecosystem services and such like, and that can come in through the discount rate. We did a review at the Treasury because of this, and they opted not for an environmental discount rate, but for pricing to be increasing over time to reflect scarcity. Okay, that's ongoing work there. But there's a whole bunch of work by people like Fran Moore trying to introduce ecosystem services into the social cost of carbon, a kind of relative price environment discounting effect over these days. Then lastly, there's a few more Green Book updates here. Oh yeah, New York. They put their social cost of carbon up to $125 per ton because of this paper here. It appeared in a court case because the Biden changes were being contested in the Ninth Circuit. And they used our paper as a piece of evidence there to say, no, the experts think the discount rate should be 2%. Isn't that interesting? And then finally, you've got the review that the Biden administration undertook. Now, they are thinking about social costs of carbon and why discounts, what the level of the discount rate should be. They're thinking about the Ramsey rule, right? This is something that never happened in the US before because they're all about market rates in the US and positive rates. But this is sort of happening. It happened. The recommendations came out, a whole bunch of papers, some from macroeconomics, from Bauer Rudebusch, etc. And then the guidelines changed, discount rate changed down to 2% with a declining term structure for long-term discount rates. Exactly what David Pearce was thinking about back in 2003. So that's broadly what I'm thinking about. But now we've had interruption 2, which kind of reversed all of that. And we've gone back to the 2003 guidance on the A4 in the US, which is like 7% discount rate for everything. And they're dismantling the social cost of carbon infrastructure, unfortunately. Okay, good news is New Zealand have redone their discount rates, declining discount rates. The Treasury, France Strategy, the UK Treasury, that's Marc Fleubert up there and Joseph Lowe, they're reviewing their discount rate right now. There's a process in place in the UK, and guess who's going to do the review for the Treasury on the discount rate? Who knows? Who can possibly say? But anyhow, that's charted the 20 years since David died, and his influence on my career has gone kind of full circle in a way. We've been through all of the literature on social discounting. I wouldn't have got into that, and I wouldn't be standing here in front of you, esteemed people, had it not been for his influence. It's been an incredible journey, even though it's a very arcane literature, actually. It's had a lot of policy influence. So there it is.
So I think I might be the only non-academic in this room. So I'll give you a very different perspective about how David Pearce influenced and how I feel my personal career and work, as well as the way I see his influence on the policy sphere in which I'm also active. And but maybe just to also give this background about how did I come to David Pearce? How did I come to know about him? And I was lucky in that in my undergraduate degree, I was told my main tutor was Dieter Helm. And so at a time when environmental economics really wasn't anywhere to be seen on undergraduate syllabus, we did have contact with this topic early on. He did bring it up, and he made us read some of David Pearce's work. And so this was the first way that I had some possibility to appreciate David's work, and also obviously immediately be really influenced by the clarity of his writing, and the kind of urgency in which he was able to communicate both the issues at hand, but also the need to use economics in order to find a better way to approach those and find better policies. And it was with that in mind that I was really hunting to try and find a master's degree that allowed me to have a more profound understanding of this. And maybe for the younger people in this room, at the time, it really was the only course in Europe. I mean, when David Pearce built up this program and CSearch, when Ben and I were sitting in the same very dingy classroom, I remember. I mean, it was literally, I think, 24 of us sitting there, 95 to 96 in our case. And it was still seen a little bit with some skepticism all around, really, about how, and from both sides, so from the economists, well, can you really use economic principles for the environment? And the other way around, from the environmentalists, well, do we really want to put a price on some of this? And so I think it was hugely influential. And maybe what came to my mind when I was thinking about the kind of broader picture of David Pearce's influence, I really thought about 3 Ps. The first one is pioneering. He was, I think, very much pioneering. And I already mentioned the way he built up this course, which was really unique at the time. And secondly, of course, also in the research that he did and the questions he asked, and in the way he would try to use economic principles to advance analysis and on the environment and on understanding how we could reach better decisions. The second P to me is policy-oriented. He was very much I think, through his writing, but also through his engagement with institutions, was always very clear about the fact that this wasn't an academic subject for academic sake. It was very much about better tools, better analysis, and making sure that this would actually influence also some decisions and not just stay in some publication somewhere, even however grand and honored that may be. And I think that, again, his style, but also the way he engaged, with institutions such as the World Bank, the OECD, the UN, IPCC, even Jeff, and many other institutions, he was really there to work on it. He even we very nearly managed to get him to do a training course in FAO, although the bureaucracy ended up holding us back. But so I think he was very, very willing to bring his expertise also to a very applied level. And the third P is pragmatic. I think he was. I work at the FAO at the investment center. The investment center is the part in the FAO being the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, where we collaborate mostly with international financial institutions at project appraisal, project design for large loan programs, public investment programs. And of course, their appraisal is a major aspect. And at the time, I think we generally work in environments that are even more constrained when it comes to data and timelines than many of you are, even though I'm sure in the research that continues to also be an issue. But we often have very, very limited data, very limited timeframes. And I think I was very inspired by his approach that in the end, it's about trying to have better decision making, trying to use the tools, even within limited environments, within limitations, within constraints, but being very conscious of remaining conceptually clear about what you can or can't say with limited information and with limited analysis. And also, even that if we have assessments where we have imperfect data, or we can at least have an assessment, is this likely to be significant or not, for instance? If we're looking at project appraisal, is one of these environmental impacts, is this likely to make a change about whether or not this project is viable or not, rather than, is it about, the marginal percentage change, but what about the big picture? Does this matter? Does this not matter? So I think it's these three areas, the pioneering, the policy-oriented approach, and also this pragmatic approach of working with what you have, but remaining conceptually clean in the way that you analyze what you can and can't say, given the information you have. I see those as three major areas that have influenced where he brought his influence, I think, to the world, and that certainly has also had a lot of impact on the way I try to do my work at FAO. And another area of also is the use of market instruments, I think, and this is something where we're working now. We already had some discussion earlier about carbon markets and offsets, and we've recently, if someone's interested, also we have been looking a lot at how the agri-food sector also can participate in carbon markets with all the issues that relate, of course, also to MRV issues as well, permanence and additionality and all of that, but also trying to see whether financing flows through such markets can help to do a transition towards more sustainable agri-food systems. And those are some areas, again, where we're trying to, I think, with that spirit also see how market mechanisms can be brought to bear on the kind of change we need to see on the ground in the policy space, but ultimately in real life.
If I may, the fourth one somehow is another P. I would say putting a price, because he was convinced that the environment was undervalued, and that if we couldn't put a price, we couldn't address the issue. So yes, a fourth P probably. Xavier.
Well, first of all, it's an honor for me to be here in this panel, and I thank Simone for this very nice initiative. I think David deserved this, and it is great to be here. I recommend you to read a paper that was circulated to us a few weeks ago by Frank Convery, who wrote it for the Environmental and Resource Economics in 2007. The paper is titled David Pearce, Making the Difference. I mean, it's great. And I think that it summarizes many of the things that were said here, and also in the nice way that Frank uses to praise people, to dissect, the contributions and the value of persons. By the way, I think that we'll have a video by Frank in the website, not today, but you will have in the website of the annual conference or FSR Climate.
Yeah, I take the opportunity. I wanted to say it at the end, but we ask Frank Convery and Ayumi Onuma to record short videos on their memories, their experience with Frank. They're probably too long now, but we will put them on the website of the conference and probably link it to the EAIRI, to the European Association, because this is also organized in collaboration with the Policy Outreach Committee. And yes, they are interesting testimonies, I would say.
Well, actually, there are also other very nice obituaries. But this is a paper, in a way. I mean, it has like 15 pages or 14 pages, perhaps. Then we can talk a bit about some things we were discussing before, of problems he had, or his stance on some issues. So it is difficult to. I mean, many things were already said, and I will be brief. But I would like to, first of all, come back to the issue of head of department of economics. If I'm not wrong, Ben, the Department of Economics of UCL now is one of the top departments in the UK, and has been like that for decades, right? And you were mentioning that when David came there, it was probably not such a good department at all, right? So this says a lot about him in general economics, not only in our field. But I would say that sticking to environmental economics is one of the fathers, I would say, in the discipline. Some of the obituaries state this. He wrote together with some other major figures in the area, these blockbusters like Blueprint for a Green Economy, Environmental Economics, handbooks, etc., that led many of us, Simone, Astrid, myself, to go to UCL to do the masters, right? Because they were so well written and they were so new at the moment that, and also they were very, well sold. I mean, they were products that many people outside economics, outside academia, read. Within economics, within environmental economics, I think he contributed a lot. I mean, we saw now in this very crucial part on social discounting how he did a lot, inspired a lot, but also he contributed in the different areas in our field with ideas, with research. He published many books, many papers. And as Simone said, he was, I wouldn't say obsessed, but he was really emphasizing the need to react to the problems of a market economy with the tools of a market economy, right? So he was very good at showing how, the externalities were associated to these market economies, and how we had to use, prices particularly to solve this problem. Now, of course, there were many criticisms at the moment, but he inspired a lot of research and literature there. Of course, he was also a big contributor in cost-benefit analysis, not only in the environmental area. His book on cost-benefit analysis is one of the major books in the area. And also he was, if I'm not wrong, one of the first to talk about weak sustainability, strong sustainability. So his contributions were very varied within our field. But I work mostly, as Simone said, in environmental policy and particularly on environmental taxation, environmental pricing. And that was another reason why I went to London, because he was very clear on the usefulness of these instruments, as I said before, and he devoted, as Astrid said, a lot of time to policy advice, and he influenced a lot policy making. Rereading, Frank's papers and other contributions on his achievements. It is amazing how many things that we take for granted now were first proposed by him. Many of the taxes that were first implemented in the UK and then extended to other countries were his idea. Landfill tax, other taxes in the UK, this accelerator of fuel taxes was also his idea. So some major contributions were his, and not only he was an inspirer, but he was, influencing a lot the policy making process to make these ideas real. He was actually the first to talk about double dividend, which is rather amazing, right? I mean, his paper in 1991 in the Economic Journal, he mentioned the issue of double dividend and how we could use carbon taxes to get revenues and then substitute other distortionary taxes. So many of you are now presenting papers on the use of revenues and how we could use these revenues to foster more acceptability or etc. I mean, some of the inspiration of this research is in here, right? I would say that he also was a very nice person. He was not fundamentalist at all. He was a suboptimal guy. I mean, he was pragmatic in the sense that he knew the way, but he was not this kind of fundamentalist who only agrees with the perfect approach. I mean, he was really able to accept trade-offs or suboptimal designs, and that's very valid if you want to influence policy making. And we can see from the different applications of his work that he was successful there. That's why it's surprising that sometimes he had some kind of bad reactions from colleagues, heterodox economists or NGOs, like these demonstrators in front of UCL.
What's in it?
Yeah,
Me too.
you too. So in a way, such a nice guy and pragmatic guy in front of these problems was surprising for many of us. And of course, the master. I think this was a crucial move by him. Many of the people that are now researching with a certain age in Europe or having, decision in policy making or consultancy, etc., come from this master. So I think that was also a very good idea by David, and also very, very useful. And I will stop here. Perhaps then we can discuss some of the issues more in depth.
Thank you, Xavier.
Yeah, really an honor. Really big thanks, Simone, because really a pleasure being here, sharing some thoughts with you. Changed a bit the flavor, the impact. I mean, I remember very well being a student at the University of Bologna, very good faculty, but a bit bored by inflation and unemployment, a bit of econometrics, fiscal policy, monetary policies, and so on and so forth. So at that, I came across, the only translated book at the time, Pearce and Turner, by Molino Bologna in the early 90s. So it was really the only sort that we also had books in English, but in Italian at the time was the only book. Bit of the funny thing, I was thinking now that all books in economics by Molino were brown. Were brown, including that one. So I don't know whether it was on purpose. Yeah. And then it happened that, so it was really a time for young people. Now it's really spectacular. You, at least in Italy, but the UK was different, but that's why we moved. But workshops, conferences, seminars, not at all. Okay, there was the courses, master courses, it was zero. Okay, something around maybe in Siena, in Pavia, but not really structured. So it happened that David was invited, I think, by the Faculty of Agriculture Economics in Perugia, and I took my car and we drove to Perugia. So he is there, so we have to. And so he had this seminar. So I decided, I applied to UCL, and I landed in London in 1997. Just at the beginning, also sharing and citing some people, was spectacular from the beginning. We had the first meeting, I remember, at the pub, also with David Madison there, and it was the first meeting we had. I was really shocked, but okay, that's a community. I think James McGregor. James was one of the guys of that year. And at the end, with summer 1998, another thought. We had a meeting while I was preparing my master's thesis upstairs, that C-Surge floor. And I remember two things. So one was, okay, you're finishing your master. Remember that they need you outside. So they need your skills. So because the risk was being exploited by the market or by. So the message was, okay, you now you have skills and competencies. So and also David, and also Tim Swanson was my supervisor, supported the submission of my master thesis as a paper. That I didn't mind. I didn't know what papers were. So this kind of support was really. Also, Susanna Morata, who was my co-supervisor, had a PhD not there, but in Rome. So really, Steve Smith as well. Very nice community. Also shocked because I am Tim Swanson. I came across a book talking about elephants at the time, with elephants and rhinos. So it was really shocking for us students in economics. So yeah, so that was cool. So I think that I wanted to share with you some thoughts about during that time. That I have other citation for next round, maybe. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you much. Thank you. Sharing your memories, and I also had rhinos and elephants in one of the lectures, and I remember photocopying the article and saying, what the hell? I would like to open the floor to a Q&A session, taking advantage of having them in the panel. If I may, I would like to invite someone to express her views, because today we have Romina Cavatassi, who's at the World Bank Group, and actually I invited her to the panel, but she was shy. No, it's not true. She said, I was not a student of David Pearce. She was at LSE in those years. We're competing, but still somehow her professional life is connected to David Pearce as well. So, Romina, if you want to say a few words.
Thanks, Simone, and thanks for inviting me, nevertheless, even if I was not one of David's students. But I can share a lot of reflections that have been shared here. And also going back to what Astrid mentioned, I was also a student of economics at the University of Bologna. And I remember all the Molino, Brown books, not only economics, but also statistics had the Brown books, yeah. And I realized that I didn't like a lot of the courses I was taking at the time, but I was passionate about the environment. So actually I formulated a personal path, and the dean of the faculty called me and asked me, are you sure you want to graduate in economics? Because I had taken courses from the University of Agricultural Sciences on ecology, And I had taken one from the from the Faculty of Statistics, which was about environmental economics and development, on which I graduated later on. So I did a thesis on using a contingent valuation method on the water subsistence subsidies in Bologna, which was very unusual in the Faculty of Economics. But the reason, I justified this different types of subjects because I had already a passion on environmental economics. And at the time, the only things I could find was indeed coming either from the US or from David Pearce in UK. And so after the graduation, then I started looking into master courses. And I did apply at UCL, but I also applied at LSE. And between the two, I went to his alma mater instead of going to UCL, also because I had studied a lot of economics. And so I wanted to also have some flavors. So I went to the Department of Geography, where Ben is now. And Giles Atkinson, who was one of David's students, was my supervisor for the thesis. And then I followed with a PhD on natural resource economics. And I met Astrid in FAO. So then, but we were, because then I moved to IFA, then to the World Bank now, but into, I'd say, extreme of FAO, because I was in the research department and she's in the investment side of things. So, but we always complemented a lot of the work that we have been doing. So he's influenced my life a lot in my career. Thank you.
And that's somehow the most impressive aspect, that, even if you are not one of the students, still you have been influenced indirectly by his figure. Any question, curiosity, doubt, whatever that you would like to ask the panel? Or personal memories, if you feel.
Well, can I say something?
Yes, please. Then I will follow up.
So yes, it's been very interesting to hear your thoughts about David. And so he had various very important qualities, I think, which allowed him to be so successful. One of which was to recognize, the opportunity for changing policy. So the blueprint, right? It was written in a style of the day, which was all about market economics. It was all about, in the UK, it was all about shareholder economies. Even Weitzman had a book called The Shareholder Economy, which was in circulation in the Conservative government at that time. And the blueprint was written in that style, speaking to that particular administration. And that was why he became the advisor to the Tory government in those days. And that book was so successful. It was really just written, it was like a zeitgeist sort of a moment for environmental economics. So that's a huge quality, one which I definitely don't have. And I'm full of admiration for him having that quality. He was also a very avuncular guy. I think that's the right word. I mean, he was a very nice guy. So I remember when I was doing my PhD once, I happened to sort of, mention that I was struggling a bit for money. And the next thing I knew, I was giving a presentation to a delegation from the municipality of Tomsk, not in Siberia. They had come from Siberia to London to hear something about how they could use protected areas to raise money, taxation. And so there's me with some guy he knew in the government who I had never met before and I've never met since, and me, simultaneous translation into Russian, talking about protected areas, and I got 500 quid for that, and I was very, very happy about it at the time. That was a lot of money, So he really sorted people out. He brought people in and he helped people out. And that was my enduring memory of it. And what I tried to do, of course, is do that in my role, because I'm an academic now. I'm sort of quite senior. I've got a certain amount of power, but I really only have the power to help people along in some way, and that's what I try to do. So one other story is that my master's thesis, there was a program on the master's that we took, where some people went out to one of his connections in the Natal Parks Board, who was working for the Natal Parks Board in South Africa, and we got to go and do our dissertations out there. So I went out there. Next thing I knew, I'm walking along a beach on the coast of South Africa, doing a contingent valuation survey for my master's thesis. And when I became an academic at School of Oriental and African Studies, something like that fell into my lap as well. And I thought, aha, I was working with Africa Rice at the time in Benin, and they had loads of data that they needed analyzing. I said, well, why don't we send some master's students out there to work with them? And that's what we did. We had a pretty successful program. And I'm not very imaginative. I wouldn't have come up with that had it not happened to me. So very influential in all sorts of ways. Yeah.
Well, perhaps he was very insistent in policy advice, right? And with not only with the UK government, but also, as Astrid mentioned, with the World Bank, OECD. And I think that's something, in Frank's paper, he quotes a civil servant from the UK saying, well, I couldn't understand how he gave us so much feedback for so little money, because he was not following his own reasoning of opportunity costs, etc. Right? But actually, he was trying, clearly to put his ideas, the ideas of environmental economics, into practice. And I think this is something if you are interested and if you read Frank's paper, you will see how many things that we see nowadays as normal, they were inspired and defended and implemented because of him. I knew his value, and of course I knew when I was with him. I knew the many things he was operating in, but just reading this paper shows you his huge influence, not only academia, but beyond academia. And this is something quite strange, quite rare in our field. And you have to have a special character to achieve this.
I think there is a question over there. Sorry that I didn't see you. Please go ahead.
I would like to ask an open question for the panel members about what your thoughts about social discounting are, because there are criticisms from the ecological side and also from the economic side about this concept of putting a price tag on natural resources, and even how you persuade policymakers and the public that your price tag is effective and reliable. So what do you think about this concept?
Andreas, how long do we have on this? Because a bit of a can of worms, that actually. So I think the what's the best way forward here? So there certainly is resistance to the idea of value, putting a value on everything, and certainly David was. His theory of change was that most of the environmental amenities that we benefit from and biodiversity and such like were just sort of missing from market exchanges. And the sort of solution to that, part of it at least, was to say, okay, what are these values that we're missing? And so the huge amount of his work was on valuation. And back in 96 and 95 and 96, there was so many contingent valuation studies happening on this and that part. So it does sort of grate a little bit when we start putting prices on everything. But I guess we have to be sort of measured in terms of the success and whether or not that theory of change is successful or not. And so some of the things that we learned about in the master's program, like carbon markets, tradable permits, etc., which essentially putting a price on something which is unpriced, very successful, right? That's worked really well. Environmental taxes, that has worked pretty well in many contexts. There are also failures, of course, and we have to work out why that is. And quite often it's because the price people don't respond to prices in the way that sort of neoclassical economists expect us to. So, yeah, I understand the debates on the discount rate. Let's not go into the discount rate. You tyrannize someone whether you have a zero discount rate or a positive or a negative discount rate. The question is one of balance. I think that's where I'm at with your question, which is a really, really very good one. Difficult question.
Yeah, just to share, yes, thanks for the question, because it is a very, very hot topic when you are in inter-multidisciplinary type of settings, and it is always often the case that the issue of positive discounting prices are discussed. Just a memory, I have in my reading, no, I don't have in my reading list because the paper is impossible to find, but I remember that in the reading list we had a paper on a contingent valuation in Madagascar where they used the baskets of rice instead of money or even time or other things. That just to say that in some context, for example, Madagascar in the 80s, where you had to check before if money in dollars were accepted as a unit of change. If not, people could trade, or trade-offs could be evaluated, for example, by using baskets of rice, because they were the accepted thing there. Okay, that's the thing. If I may, in 1 minute, jumping from contingent valuation to taxes, a paper I do have, and I may recommend to young scholars that I have in my reading list in my course in environmental economics and policy is, maybe, I don't know whether it's the last paper, because 2006 Energy Economics is the political economy of an energy tax, the UK climate change levy. Nice paper because it talks about political economy, which is not economics. I don't want to enter this hot discourse, but political economy is not just about theories, it's about implementing theories and checking the difference between the optimal and the effective second, third best solution. We can have also citing Bone and Notes famous chapter, but just reading in 1 minute, in the conclusion, he states, in political economy analysis, in which the interaction of economics and political reality is emphasized, explains the gap between theoretical ideals and practical reality. A closer look at the factors that influence real-world policy design should help policy-oriented economists in designing measures that have a greater chance of adoption. However, great care is needed in pursuing the political economy perspective. So, because the risk is that these later stages are not pursued, and what is becomes what should be, simply because what is can be explained by the various immutable factors faced by real-world decision makers. So this, again, the very final conclusion is this Panglossian analysis, citing Voltaire, I guess, needs to be avoided. So, okay, we need to implement policies using theories, but then we have also to be aware of the fact that what is not, it could be changed. Okay.
Thank you. I wanted to also comment on this in terms of the, the value or not of going there and trying to come up with numbers for these various rates. And I think the key thing is in my view, it's important that we understand that values can be useful for different contexts. So if we have a fixed budget, if we have only a certain amount of money that we need to spend somehow for public goods, we need to have some form of way to try and allocate that in the best possible way, taking also into account external benefits, etc. And for all of that, I think we need these tools, and we need to try and do those as best as possible, because simply not putting a value on it or not going there just means that you're doing it in the dark, right? So, but then at the same time, and I think this is where economists often fall foul, one has to distinguish very clearly between that in terms of as a tool for budgeting for appraisal purposes and value in terms of a moral or an intrinsic value terms, which is a totally different story, right? I mean, that may have all kinds of different dimensions that are perfectly, really not very well representable for economic tools. So I think it's important to keep those things separate. And maybe one other comment, I mean, coming obviously from the UN side, and Romina would be able to answer this a lot better, but of course, from the research angle, the inequality aspect of this, right? So of course, if we're thinking purely in terms of a willingness to pay argument, then those that are, as we saw in the first, setting the scene this morning, the people who are suffering most from climate impacts are in the poorest countries. In most cases, obviously, their willingness to pay is going to be very low. Does that mean we should do less about that? Well, no, clearly. I mean, it's not. So it's not the question of this being the only way to look at problems and this being a one kind of decision rule, but it's a way looking at these discount rates and how to do it properly is a way to think about budgeting and allocation more efficiently while keeping in mind all the limitations with that and looking at justice and democracy and decision making and intrinsic value in a way that can inform a broader public policy management.
We have to come to a close, but Romina, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, but substantially Massimiliano and Astrid have already mentioned is that, I mean, I understand the debate, but I would ask back, what if we didn't attribute a value to things that are considered free access? It would be much worse. So the revolutionary approach is precisely to help decision-making and especially to make the decision think about the importance and the value of certain things that otherwise would be much worse without. Let's put it simply. And I wanted to share that one of the first things I was asked to do when I went to FAO was to review 5 projects on attribute. The projects were about forestry benefits. And the one project that I came across that had made an attempt to attribute value also to to carbon, it was the early days of carbon pricing. And Astrid Agostini was in that department. So one of the projects I reviewed that made the best attempt of giving a value to unpriced forestry benefits, including carbon and including biodiversity, was a project where Astrid was involved and that attributed a price to those things. So, and I think it's important to account for those things. And the same applies now to the true cost of food. So I don't know if you're familiar with that topic, but similarly, the cost of health, for example, of things that are unhealthy, it's a social cost. It's very similar to environmental pricing. So it makes us think twice about the type of investments that we make. So I think it's essential, not only important.
Thank you, Romina. I have to wrap up and close, but before I do that, let me show you something that I found at home Sunday night while I was preparing. Well, okay, how shall I shape the session? And that's why I wrote you an email. We had a night exchange with Ben. And I looked for something, from the past. And there are a couple of things I wanted to show you because it's kind of funny if I manage. Okay. No. It's a bit small, but this is the kind of things that he used to do. In my pigeonhole, he left articles that he think I should read, So on my way back, I found things like this directly from him. He thought I was Simone Borghese, not Borghese, but never mind. He got it in the end after a few attempts. And the other one, sorry, I'm so bad at these things. I wanted to, okay, yes, here we go. I found a couple of letters by David to me. Consider that I was a master student, okay? He read what I gave him and commented. And the incredible thing is especially the comment on my dissertation, because it's dated October. So actually, the master was over. I had already finished the dissertation. It was already evaluated. I was already here because I decided after UCL to come here for the PhD. Never mind, he gets to read it at that time, and it takes the time to write me and comment. So for me, this is incredible. I keep it. I found it among the letters that I really loved. There is one by Robert Solo. Robert Solo wrote me when I was an undergraduate student. It's absolutely incredible. And this makes me think also, reflect on myself, because I don't have time to answer the tons emails I receive every day, and this is the real nightmare of my life. But David Pearce, found the time to write to his students. And, at that time, you're almost handwriting to your students. It's not, computers were almost non-existent. Emails were at the very, very, very beginning. So this makes me reflect on the passion of this person. I think the word passion came up a few times. He's described as a passionate scholar by those who are generally interviewed. And since, there is one thing that we're all endowed the same, which is time, I'm very grateful. So thank you, David.